should. I should... ... Fill in the gaps. They should. People should. Think about how often you've either said that to yourself. Think about how often that's often running through the mind when we're experiencing a strong emotion. Usually a negative one. Should's a pretty problematic word because it's concrete, it's absolutist. And once the rule that should establishes has been violated, it can cause us some measure of distress, whether that be anger, upset, frustration, which then will exhibit itself in behaviour. As we're exploring the world of leadership, it's not unusual for leadership programs, including my own, to begin with an examination of self, because if we are going to choose a set of value-centric behaviours to enrol others to willingly walk with us down unknown paths towards a goal that benefits the group, a common definition I use when describing leadership, the behaviours that we want to deploy, as much as possible, should be conscious. They should be on purpose. And yet, how often do we have strong reactions, often out of nowhere, that can get in the way of our ability to think clearly, our ability to make wise decisions, and truly engage and sit with people no matter where they might be. Should is a representation of a deeply held belief. Indeed, if you ever get a chance, have a look at this fantastic book, Change Your Thinking, by Dr. Sarah Edelman, a fantastic Australian psychologist. And she has a chapter in the book called The Tyranny of Shoulds. Oft people use an iceberg as a metaphor for the human being, because above the waterline, all we see of someone is their behaviour, but there's a vast body going underneath the waterline. And in the human being as an iceberg metaphor, what that often references is that beneath the waterline, what's driving behaviour are appraisals and emotions that are often governed by our upbringing and experience, our values, our culture, and our beliefs. So today, when we talk about beliefs, we're talking about those unconscious assumptions that we make about the way the world works. Now, because they're unconscious, they're often, by definition, not running around on purpose in our mind. They're quite automatic, they're quite quick to govern how we view events. So if you think about behaviour, there's a trigger event, there's some sort of emotional response, there's a behaviour, but between the trigger and the emotion and the behaviour, there's this lens, this set of goggles that we wear, which are these unconscious beliefs. And a great way to examine when you are finding yourself behaving in a way that surprises you, that distresses you, or that's coming across in a way that might be in opposition to your purpose to enrol people to walk with you down unknown paths towards a goal that benefits the group, often you'll find that that lens is a belief that has the word should within it. People should be polite. People should know to include me in the conversation. People should work hard all the time. I should be successful. I should be liked. I should be the smartest person in the room. Whatever your should is, it requires examination. Now, the whole approach to this kind of work is not to replace one should with another, to find out what is that hard and fast golden rule that you can live your life by. With maturity, with consciousness development, one of the things that I like to talk about with my clients is moving from a very black and white way of thinking, moving from a very concrete way of thinking to a more flexible way of thinking that will enable us to meet the actual complexity of the world in which we're navigating. So let me give you an example. I might think to myself, high performers should always be promoted. Maybe that's a rule I've made for myself. So imagine I'm going for a promotion at work. and I don't get it. That's the trigger event. I don't get a promotion. I experience a strong emotional response, dejection. And maybe my behaviour is to say to myself, gosh, I mustn't be a high performer. Or maybe my behaviour will be to say, it's not fair. But what's guiding that is this lens which says that high performers should always be promoted. Now, there's no use me tackling this kind of work by saying, well, high performers should never be promoted, because that's just replacing one black and white bit of thinking with another. Instead, the approach to this work is to make that should a little more flexible. And what Sarah Edelman talks about, which I think is fantastic, is something called disputing statements that you spend time to write out. And you might say something along the lines of, whilst it's probably great that high performers have avenue to promotion and should be considered for promotion, often there are a range of factors that contribute to promotion. And perhaps in this instance, there's more data that I don't have. Do you see how that's a much more flexible way of seeing the situation? I should be liked. How often does that govern our behaviour? I need to be liked by people around me. To be good is to be liked, right? I should be liked in order to be feeling okay. Now, this doesn't mean we replace it with I should not be liked. Rather, let's dispute that statement and make it a little more flexible. Whilst it'd be great if we could get along with everyone, oftentimes there are a range of factors that mean we don't. And that's okay. That final part of the puzzle, and that's okay, is a really important one, because it's a recognition and acceptance that things just are the way they are. For some of you that have explored Buddhism, you'll recognise that this is also another language for attachment. A great deal of anxiety and distress comes from our attachment to ideas, propositions, worldly goods, status, whatever it might be. Being attached is another word for being should. Should. Let's let go of that need to have an absolute definition of the way the world should work. If we are wanting to operate from a place of consciousness, a place where the things that we do are done on purpose, then we also must recognise that we'll be interacting with people who hold many, many different worldviews. And if we want to stay in the moment and be present with those people, whether they be peers, direct reports, bosses, clients, other stakeholders, then we've got to make sure we're not being reactive. We've got to make sure that we're not being predictable. We've got to make sure we're being effective. So being on top of our triggers, our attachments, and starting to find a conscious way of allowing our brains to sit in that a little bit more grey area of flexible thinking will enable us to make better and more wise decisions. So cut the should, all right? Get it out of your life. Now, if you want some help with this kind of work, write out what are common things that drive you crazy. What are common things, triggers and events that create in you negative reactions? What are behaviours in others that you find distressing, annoying, frustrating, whatever it might be? Write out, first of all, the event. Then, the second thing, what do you do? What's the behaviour? So go there so that we see a clear line between the stimulus and the response. Then, what I'm asking you to do is to just backward track. What's the emotion you're feeling? Where does it show up in your body? Is it a tightening of the chest? Is it an anger? Okay, that's okay. Let's recognise it for what it is. Now, in between that emotion and that trigger, let's really entertain. What rule have I made that's creating it? Where did I get it from? Was it mum? Was it dad? Was it church? Was it school? Whatever it might be. What has, kind of created this hard and fast rule? What's a more flexible way? Write it down. How could I make that a little more flexible? Now, what I'm talking about here, people, are the decisions that are going to help you in your leadership quest. This is not about removing rules from society or laws, because, of course, thou shalt not kill. I think that's a pretty good rule. But those are socially agreed rules that are consciously applied through our frameworks. What I'm talking about here is what rules are you creating for yourself unconsciously that might be getting in the way of purposeful, conscious leadership.